Hi. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. If I speak like this, will you be able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Alhamdulillah. Um, are we ready to start then? Allahu Akbar. Sorry. All right. Let us begin. Inshallah. Al-Fatiha lana wa aslafuna salihin. وبنية أن الله يفتح علينا فتوح العارفين ويفقهنا في الدين وإلى حضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بسر الأسرار الفاتحة أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم أنت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. Very well. Alhamdulillah. I take it that it's been some time since we had our last session. Sorry, just matters of setting it up. Well, Alhamdulillah. So today, inshallah, we will resume our discussion with our second series, which is now on ethics, focus on the problem of philosophical ethics or the science of ethics, as we advertised it. The last time we have been through, I suppose, 8 sessions on a general introduction to philosophy. Already considerations of ethics must have been discussed as we have done. We know that we have had discussions over 8 sessions, I believe, from Greek philosophy down to the contemporary philosophy. In this next series, our focus will be to zoom in on a particular branch of philosophy, which is ethics. Ethics is what we call a branch of practical philosophy, or in Arabic, the scholars called it hikmah amaliya. Practical philosophy, aside from ethics, also consists of several other disciplines which are interrelated, and this includes economics, politics, as well as law. And these are all mutually, shall we say, influencing each other. As for theoretical philosophy, hikmah nadariya, they include the science such as metaphysics, epistemology, and the branches of metaphysics, which include things such as ontology, theology, and others. As for ethics, and as for our first session today, our focus will be on to discuss the development of ethics amongst the Greeks. We know that this term ethics is a Greek term, yes, which, according to the scholars, especially if you find in, say, dictionary entries such as the history or such as the dictionary of philosophy, you will find that the term ethics will have 2 etymological meanings. One of the meaning of ethics is custom, to be accustomed to something. And the other is a branch or a discipline pertaining to character and its formation. So that's the subject matter of ethics. As for its development amongst the Greeks, we have to bear in mind that the development of the science of ethics as a separate discipline, and this, I believe, an illuminating discussion on this is the discussion of philosophy as the science of describing worldview. We know that not all worldviews are, shall we say, transparent or semi-transparent, in that they are able to describe just exactly how their ethics are defined, how their metaphysics are understood. According to Professor Al-Parsalan in his book Islamic Science Towards a Definition, he was saying that if say a worldview develops scientifically and not just something naturalistically forming, it would be able to describe, after it reaches some degree of complexity, their ethical commitments, their notion of values, and so on. Sometimes the occasion behind the rise of of philosophical ethics, or the ability to describe your sense of right and wrong and moral values, where it derives from, can come from changes in regularities, changes in social customs, changes in behaviors, allowing the person who has underwent this change to describe the previous and the present condition. So to give an example of amongst the Greeks, we know that as philosophy began to develop in the 5th and 4th centuries BCE, um, amongst the things that happened was an economic shift from a society that primarily can be described as an agrarian society with monarchy as its political system, to a society that witnessed the rise of a commercial and industrial class with democracy as its system. Notice how well um, how how well suited democracy is to the rise of industrial and commercial living, because the rise of money in the form that was used in Athens and several other Greek city-states, it equalizes between consumers or buyers and also sellers, in that they are not distinguishable from one another. And this is in contrast with the monarchical system and the agrarian system that allowed for, say, shall we say, crystallized social hierarchy. So therefore, the development of philosophy and worldview would also reflect this. And this not necessarily subscribing to the Marxian notion of the base and the superstructure, where the base is economics and philosophy merely being its superstructure. We can also say, I believe this is something that Bakir as-Sadr in his book Falsafatuna, Our Philosophy, has said, that rather than said that man or human beings sort of like automata in that, or basically follow as if unthinkingly, merely form superstructures of a system as a result of economic and material changes. Rather, human beings are, shall we say, beings endowed with intelligence and beings endowed with creativity, which is a function of intelligence, and endowed with, shall we say, free will, so as to develop a new system that is more in line with the new realities. So notice now that agency is part and parcel of the development of philosophy. So with regards to the Greeks, with the rise of the Greek city-states, yes, the polis, the rise of democracy, and the rise of the commercial and industrial class and new economic theories required to explain the new social realities, we therefore have a new crisis of values, a crisis of social structures, such that the Homeric myths, yes, like the Iliad and the Odyssey and several other writings that has been produced by the poets of that time, that reflects the moral virtues or the moral system of the previous structure, would become no longer suitable to describe the changing society. Furthermore, the rise of the basic industry, such as the crafts and the development of certain products that facilitated this new way of life, allowed for the rise of a new social class of people, the nouveau rich, those who are, shall we say, whereas previous society was developed through the process of socialization, the handing down of one value system from one generation to another, learned through, and equally, since we understand that it is generational in the sense of uruf, that is sent down from one generation to the other, naturally, the landed aristocracy, the aristocracy, what I mean, the higher classes of people, would be the most cultured within the old society, within the old system. But this new rearrangement with the rise of the nouveau rich, they will not be equally cultivated as the previous generation. They merely made their success in trade and in, shall we say, uh, in the new economic system. Yet, we know also that the political changes required a new set of skills that challenges the previous system. One particular set of skills that come to be valued would be rhetoric, the ability to please, the ability to justify convention and to challenge convention whenever necessary. So therefore, the sons of the nouveau rich were then required to undergo some sort of training to maximize their success as citizens. As new Greek citizens, they would hire people who would become their personal tutors, who would advance their career prospects. Because in order to become a good citizen now would mean not only success in trade and industry, but also success in the hall and in the exercise of one's political shall we say, manifestation. So then that's how, naturally, you saw the rise of the sophists, yes, the group of teachers, itinerant teachers, who go from town to town, offering their services to perfect this art of rhetoric. Amongst the names that came to be recognized, especially not necessarily through their own writings, but the writings of Plato, who perhaps may have put words into their mouth or put an amalgam into their real biographical characters, include the likes of Gorgias, Thrasymachus, Protagoras. These are names of the sophists, yes, those itinerant teachers which I spoke about. Amongst the doctrines attributed to them included, of course, what Protagoras used to say, that man is the measure of all things. Or Thrasymachus, who used to say that justice is merely the interest of the stronger. And it is easy to slip into this ethical form of relativism if you consider the changes. Because now that you see that what has been held and cherished for so many generations, that it is so easy to challenge, you might be tempted to say that, well, who's to stop the new system from changing again after some time? So therefore, they resolve that for Thrasymachus, it is said that justice is the rule of the stronger, and for Protagoras, man becomes the measure of all things. And Plato wants to say that this notion, man as the measure of all things, is not merely an ethical statement. It is part and parcel of a more general symptom of general skepticism, which includes also epistemological skepticism. To the extent that the skepticism which is applied to ethical values also is applied to, shall we say, even things such as whether a person is, whether wind really is hot or cold is dependent on the person who experiences it. So this is a form of sufasta'iyah, which we have recognized as the India, the subjectivists. At any rate, with Socrates, we can see that the systematic challenge towards the new ethical reality, to the new moral reality that appears to the state, becomes involved in a game in a process of what we call the Socratic elenches, or the Socratic method, a method of cross-examination of fundamental key terms. And this is very interesting, because we see that in the early dialogues of Plato, Socrates is portrayed to ask very fundamental questions about morality and ethics. He asks questions such as, what is justice? And this is the main question of the Republic. He asked, what is piety? The question of ethics and religion, yes, and this is in the Euthyphro. He asked in Gorgias, or in Symposium, he asked about what is the best mode of life, what is love. All these basic fundamental questions or fundamental key terms that determine your value structure was entertained by Socrates, who understood that that whatever that they have held by convention may not necessarily be true. And he exposes, Plato exposes some of the problems of morality derived from convention. in the Republic, we see in the first few pages, Plato comes across an elderly person, Cephalus, I believe his name, who from the Piraeus, where Socrates is said to have descended onto, was looking at certain festivities, and this being this being the religious practice of the Greeks, that it is a civic religion, that civic religion in the sense that religion is understood to be a civic duty, that the rituals that you commit yourself is not separable from your standing as a citizen. Meaning to say, if a person is pious, if a person is religious, it equally means that not only he's dutiful towards his religion, it also means that he is a trustworthy citizen because he participates and gives his fair share as a citizen, irregardless of the truth status of the religious claims. That's what has become of religion with the Greeks. So the character of Cephalus here talks about how an unreflective citizen might answer the question of what is justice, what is the right thing to do. He would just simply recite the typical code of a citizen of Athens or any of the Greek city-state. He would say that, well, justice would mean to sacrifice to the gods, to do this and to do that, and to do this and to do that. But that morality by convention, surely, as we, even if we are a little reflective, is not necessarily the true definition of what is justice, of what is right. Because we know that conventions of states need not necessarily be just, but it merely may reflect the interests of the parties involved in the convention. Supposing, and this we know especially in our times with regards to the doctrine of the social contract, and also the rules, regulations, and the law as it is reflected in, say, newly found nation states, and how the foundation of a nation state is its constitution, and how certain constitutions can be changed via, say, voting or democracy, and which merely shows that whatever happens to be acceptable need not necessarily be the reflection of what is truly just. But the old man in the first book of Republic was let go because he wasn't the type of a man who would properly indulge Socrates in an answer to the question of what truly constitutes right and wrong in moral actions. So basically, during the time of Socrates and on to Plato, these were philosophers who started questioning the foundations of their civic virtues. With regards to Socrates, he was happy to be the person to have questioned the examined life, or to question the sort of living of the unexamined life. Meaning to say, a person who merely just follow the conventions, merely follow whatever happens to be the case, irregardless of whether it is just or unjust. But this got certainly Socrates into trouble. He was charged with corrupting the youth, and he was charged with atheism, which in effect means a challenge of against the deities of the city. And perhaps because he applied rationality to these conventions, he is bound to expose the errors and inconsistencies of the conventions. Notice how a similar trait, although with fundamental differences, was possessed by the Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam when he challenged the conventions of the people of his time. These people were worshippers of idols, and Prophet Ibrahim, who challenged them to say that, well, why is it that you would worship the idols who do not speak, who do not possess the power to grant you life, who cannot give you naf'a wala darra, who cannot benefit you nor harm you? So those people, I think in an episode in Surah Al-Anbiya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to this group of people that having their logic or lack of logic being exposed, they pause for a moment and look down, meaning to say out of shame, because they realized that they have been wrong. So the natural human faculty wouldn't be able to accept or was already aware or conscious of the fact that it was wrong. Yet, because of the wanting to remain to the conventions of their fathers, they preferred instead to punish Prophet Ibrahim alayhi salam. In the case of Socrates, for having stirred a sort of disturbance amongst the people, for going around asking people about these fundamental questions, Socrates was, shall we say, was persecuted. He was charged with the two charges I mentioned and was forced to drink the hemlock. But throughout Plato's career as a writer and as a philosopher, this Socrates became a symbol, a symbol of philosophy, a symbol of the philosophical hero who challenged rational conventions, who challenged conventions which were not rationally defensible. Except that as we see the development of Plato's ideas, the development of Plato's writings, the figure of Socrates gradually became changed with Plato's own ideas. So when we look at, say, the defense of Socrates, the apology, and then later in the Phaedo, we now tend to see a gradual development of Plato's ethical ideas. In Plato, the subject matter of ethics begin to be developed to such an extent that he now was no longer satisfied with merely challenging the ethics of convention, the ethics that derive from convention. Plato wanted to positively define what is good, what is the good life, what is a life worth living, with, of course, provisions that Plato advanced a theory of knowledge and advanced a metaphysics in order to defend this worthy way of life. So according to Plato, as we have discussed earlier on with regards to Greek philosophy, Plato outlined a theory of forms and outlined what we call the divided line in order to suggest that out of a metaphysics of forms, perfect archetypal ideals, you can derive the way of life which is desirable. In short, this way of life which is desirable, if you were just to focus on the ethical doctrines of Plato, it is basically a reflection of his understanding of human psychology. Plato understood that human beings are, he advanced a notion of what we call tripartite psychology, that human beings are reason, anger, and desire. And basically, the kind of well-ordered life of an individual is when reason controls the desires, is when reason reigns over anger as well as desire. And this, what is true as ethics, is true also of politics, because in politics he wants to suggest that the philosophers, those who desire and love wisdom, they ought to rule. And those who are possessing of the character and attributes of courage and a love for the good, they should become as guardians, or rather they should become as auxiliaries to the guardians of the city. And then thirdly, the rest of the populace who are more concerned about, say, making a living, the craftsmen, the people involved in business and trade, they are the citizens who are ruled by the earlier classes. And furthermore, we see that in terms of ethical perfection, we can see that it is like, shall we say, a continuum. The most perfect individuals within the city would be the rulers who are the philosophers. And their education involves the perfection of their intellect, the perfection of their soul. And Plato outlined, and this is where also he outlined a theory of education that tends towards asceticism, meaning to say a full development, a full programmatic development of the mind and the spirit. And he utilizes the best knowledge of the time about, say, the effects of music. And this perhaps is a sort of a wisdom that we have lost today, because for Plato, through Socrates, his mouthpiece, he suggests that first we need to employ some degree of censorship, because literature will have an effect on human spirit. But and this is still understood now, yes, meaning to say literature, movies and such have an effect on moral development. We want to censor the sort of things that will create an unstable individual and society and so on. But yet Plato also understood, and this is perhaps something which is lost to our time, the knowledge that certain types of music, certain rhythms are more conducive to the development of the psyche compared to others, which he implements for the guardians. And the guardians are trained from early on to not be allowed to have wealth. They are to share their property in the commune. They are not allowed to have gold and silver or any of the ornaments of life. They are to be the simplest people external wise. But yet in philosophy, in mathematics, in geometry, in all the best disciplines, they are given the best and most rigorous form of training, including physical training, so as to actualize this degree of perfection. And as Plato wanted to suggest, all this is derived from his understanding of the theory of forms, or so he claims. The idea that there is a perfect form of society, which he is basically using as an abstract blueprint out of which he wants to govern human society. So that's ethics according to Plato. As we look at the more mystical type of works of Plato, perhaps the most mystical being the Symposium, which is his deliberation on the nature of love, or the object of desire, we see that he represents the ideal man in the case of Socrates as not as necessarily somebody who is an ascetic to the extent that he rejects everything of the world, but Socrates, being the ideal philosopher in the dialogue, in this dialogue, the particular dialogue Symposium, is said to be, I mean, Symposium refers to what we call a drinking party. Whereas everyone was subject to alcohol, to drinking alcohol that night, and Socrates also partook of it, yet he remained sober throughout the night. But the others, they were drunk. And the other member of the discussion was drunk with his rhetoric in describing his position in flowery terms. It loses the point. But with Socrates, he was able to master sufficient amount of rhetoric, but yet at the same time able to deliver a philosophical point on the nature of love. Ultimately, for Plato, the objects of desire which is worthy of pursuit are of a spectrum. The lowest being sexual desire, the highest being perception of reality, perception of eternity, shall we say, is the highest object of love. So Socrates, or rather Plato, wanted to point to a life of contemplation. And what he shared with Socrates is this, with regards to ethics and morality, is the idea that no one is deliberately immoral. No person is really evil. The only form of evil, according to Socrates as well as Plato, is ignorance. If a person only knows what is right, he wouldn't purposefully indulge in evil, which is something that Aristotle perhaps would disagree with. With Aristotle, as we know of his disagreement with Plato, despite having studied with Plato over a long time and despite very clear influences from Plato, we know that the model advanced by Aristotle is significantly different from Plato because of his understanding of nature. Plato was skeptical about the deliverance of sense experience. According to Plato, sense experience is a deceptive guide to reality. But Aristotle, who was trained in biology and physiology, understood that careful observation of nature can reveal many important things. And so, with the armed with the understanding that observation can reveal many important things, he understood, therefore, that with regards to human societies and human beings, we need to study existing forms, existing cultural norms. We need to study existing political systems. We need to study existing political constitutions with regards to its effects on human beings, on the human ethics. With regards to his ethical doctrine, Aristotle advanced the notion of eudaimonia, happiness. For him, morality can be discerned by its effects. The true moral doctrine for Aristotle is the one that maximizes symptoms of psychic well-being. The true morality, yes, is the one that maximizes symptoms of psychic well-being. Because since his model is of biology, he was saying that everything in nature tends towards its perfection. Already, we do not need to look at the world of forms. We can look at the acorn as it develops into the oak tree. So the human being has a tendency towards happiness, except that provided you are given the right arrangements in society, the right conventions in society, it would cut, rather than against, it would cut together along the line of the natural proclivities in human beings. So, for Aristotle, ethics becomes a science. It becomes an ilmul akhlaq for Aristotle. For him, it is about the science of the mean, how to find virtues. Happiness for him is an activity of the soul. Happiness consists in virtuous actions. Like his metaphysics, which relies on a definition, on an analysis of the word being, Aristotle's ethics relies on an analysis of the word good. We use the word good as something which is desirable, but Aristotle distinguishes several senses of the word good. We can use goodness as it applies to a knife, and that is pertaining to its functionality, fulfilling its function well. So the human souls, likewise, I mean, his understanding of human psychology, likewise, is akin to that. He sees that since human beings consist of the psyche, which is the thinking principle, and the desiring principle, as well as the anger principle, he saw that the justice or happiness rests on finding out the mean between one action which is an extreme or excess and another one which is deficiency. So he looks at human beings possessing the attribute of wit, yes, wit or cleverness in speech. If a person were to suffer excess of wit, it becomes, shall we say, foolishness. Yes, a person who jokes too much becomes foolish. However, if it's too deficient, it becomes a sort of boorishness. A person becomes too serious. And in that regard, he becomes not worthy of friendship, not light-hearted, shall we say. Similarly, when you look at the mean between courage, yes, the excess of it will be foolhardiness, yes, and its deficiency would be being a coward. But what we know that the wise person is not necessarily the person. I mean, supposing by convention, courage is defined as the ability to face challenges. But wisdom will dictate that the courageous person need not necessarily always involve himself in situations where he is surely to suffer loss, or that there is nothing to prove in that instance. So that becomes foolhardiness. Similarly, with the virtue of courage, with the virtue of temperance, excess of it will be greed, and deficiency will be, shall we say, lack of energy, lack of vitality towards life. So this is the central focus of Aristotle's ethics, which is summarized or deliberated at length in his Nicomachean ethics. So the Nicomachean ethics is a science. It is an educational program that you have to study since of all the goods that is worthy of achieving, worthy of striving towards, and how to attain them. He also talks about the good of friendship and its differences. There is the friendship of youth, the friendship of old age. The friendship of youth, according to Aristotle, is a friendship based on mutual desires. Yes, because we share the same pleasure and enjoyment. That's the characteristic of the friendship of youth. The friendship of the older tends to be a utilitarian relationship. The older and the middle-aged people, they want to enter into friendships that would be beneficial to them. They only maintain the friends who will basically assist and help them in the things that they require for their desire. But the virtuous friendship, the friendship of the philosophers, is friendship based on similarity of character, not similarity of desires per se, but similarity of character, such that you can discern that it is a mutually enriching friendship. It is based on the shared desire for the goods of the mind, shared desire of happiness, and so on. So therefore, to be a good friend, you first need to be a good person. And interestingly, with Aristotle, ethics and politics are not separate. Ethics is a preparation towards politics. Ethics is concerned with the happiness of the individual, and politics is concerned with the well-being of the community. Yes, so therein we have Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle on ethics. A further thing which I think is important to add with regards to ethics amongst the Greeks is that ethics amongst the Greeks developed, as I said just now, as a matter of the rise and development of philosophy, the rise and development of independent reason. We can, as according to the historian of ethics, Henry Sidgwick, yes, he mentioned that in order to understand the philosophical activity of the Greeks in the period of these three philosophers that I spoke, you have to understand that they understood the development and the importance of technique. Whereas previous to them, shall we say, good health was understood to be a matter of luck, meaning to say a matter of nature and a matter of yes, nature and convention. Later on, the development of technique, the development of philosophy as method with the Greeks suggests to them that rather optimum health is not achieved through convention and luck, or convention and nature. Perfect health or optimum health is achieved through its perfect cultivation under the tutelage of a health expert who gives you a proper diet like that. So this is the brilliance of the discovery of the Greek mind. The brilliance of the discovery of the Greek mind is their realization that ethics, being a practical science, just as politics, just as economics and law, suggests that they can have an improved condition were they to practice ethics better at the individual level. They can have an improved society were they to practice politics better. And they can have an improved economic situation were they to practice economics better. So you have to study in order to improve your condition. Meaning to say, exercise, just as exercise can improve your health, just as dieting can improve your health, ethics can improve your happiness, and politics can improve society, economics can improve your material condition. So that's why they studied ethics as a matter of self-advancement towards happiness. So I believe we have reached the 45-minute mark. Do we have in this initial round some questions from the crowd that you'd like to raise? Any questions? Either on Socrates, Plato, or Aristotle. Oh, yes. Perhaps I will deliberate more at length in the coming week, because we have a specific discussion on the medical model. The medical model of ethics was also developed by the Greeks. Remember, as I said just now, so ethics as a means of improvement also suggests that there can be psychotherapy. There can be, meaning to say, that just as happiness is something that you can strive as a matter of dieting and exercise, there is also cure, certainly. I mean, with this model in mind, with the physiological, biological model in mind introduced by Aristotle, it suggests that uh, those who suffer from, say, neurosis, those who suffer from angst, those who suffer from misery, can be cured through say, these practices. So basically, that's why I think Martha Nussbaum describes her book as the therapy of desire. Yes. On the meaning of Nicomachean ethics. Yes. With regards to Aristotle's writings, he has three works that deals with the matter of ethics: the Eudemian ethics, the Nicomachean ethics, and then finally the politics. These are all basically questions of ethics. The notion of economics is subsumed under politics. Now, with if you are trying to, I suppose, if the question is with regards to the meaning of Nicomachean ethics, the Nicomachus is the name of a man, uh, the son of Aristotle. So some people say, or rather, the son of Aristotle. And Nicomachus, son and student, was amongst those who collected the lectures of Aristotle. Aristotle did not leave behind, uh, writings in the manner that Plato did. Plato wrote and composed dialogues. Aristotle, on the other hand, perhaps may have written works of his own, but the ones that has been handed down to later generations, as we discussed in the previous series, tended to be lecture notes composed with his students. So Nicomachean ethics basically means that the ethics of Nicomachus. Some say because it is dedicated to his son Nicomachus, but basically the if we were to give a more accurate description of the Nicomachean ethics, is uh, ethics as a science of achieving happiness. Yes, either as how to be happy is the shall we say, is the subtitle of the Nicomachean ethics of Aristotle. Would dictatorship that dictates morality and fixes the morality of the individual and society through sacrificing basic human freedom and rights be considered moral? Well, this is a very interesting question, because dictatorship is something that the Greeks had to deal with. Um, and it can be argued, it is arguable, but perhaps even in the utopian system of Aristotle, some notion of authoritarianism is found there, although he might not use the term dictatorship. Because with regards to Plato, notice that in the Republic, he was saying that the general public, uh, the society, are to be raised on myths, on foundational myths, in order to ensure the stability of the nation. One of the myths that the would be propagated within the city-state is the myth of the metals. The myth of the metals teaches the society that human beings are born with fundamental differences at their core. Some possess gold as their core, others silver, and the others say bronze. The one that possess gold at their core are those who possess the intellect as well as desire for the good. I mean, it's say because we know already in Plato's understanding, a pre-philosophical and pre-scientific understanding, he understood that human beings are not the same in terms of potentials and capacity. Some people have a greater capacity for intellectual pursuits, except that he also considered that morality is also something that possesses quotients. So just as you can have intellectual quotient, IQ, you can have also something like an MQ, moral quotient, the degree of sympathy, the degree of desire towards morality. moral consciousness and sensitivity is also in his mind, in his pre-scientific understanding of different ranks. So he teaches this myth so that the people accept that those who would rise to the rank of becoming philosopher kings, to become guardians of the cities, are to be trusted. They would have some signs, meaning to say, for example, that in order that you can trust them, because usually rulers will have this tendency, or dictators will have some tendency to become corrupt. So in order to remove the source of corruption from his philosopher kings, he ensured that the philosopher kings are not to have any property. And they would have to dress in a certain manner. Also, they are not allowed to wear gold. And at the same time, and this rather extreme, he said that the rulers should also not have children. They can have relations in a sort of public gathering, um, but they are not. But meaning to say, in a communal sort of um, action together between the males and the females of the guardians. He does not exclude the possibility of a female guardian, so that is advanced for his time. But the idea is that you cannot have any. They cannot have. They cannot be. They were not allowed to identify who are their children. So that way, that would remove the possibility of corruption in the philosopher king. In other words, what Plato is suggesting is that the best form of governance is some degree of dictatorship, but it is the dictatorship of the morally sound, the morally pure, or rather the morally best, the one who is most intelligent and the one who is most ethical, ought to be dictating, because the masses, the lower rung of the society, will not be able to tell what is good and what is best for themselves. This is, of course, we don't have to agree with this, but this is the proposed utopia by Plato, because Plato disagrees with, say, a notion of democracy, so as to be able to bring about justice. Because democracy, as Aristotle also rightly said, that if democracy is merely ruled by the people, then the people, if they are morally virtuous, then it would be a sort of democracy of the best. But if the people are not morally virtuous, then you'd have some sort of rule by the mob, wherein they would steal the wealth of the aristocracy. They would steal the wealth of the rich in order to give to the ones who do not deserve it, and so on. At any rate, would dictatorship that dictates morality and fixes the morality of the individuals and society through sacrificing basic human freedom and rights be considered moral? Well, this in itself is a very good moral question. I would suggest, I mean, if we now we are just talking in terms of Greek terms, or in terms of Greek philosophy, what would be the counter to that? What would be the counter example to that? Well, first, the problem, I suppose, in terms of meta ethics, is that you'd have to determine what truly is moral. Supposing if we can, you can jettison this question and you can say, supposing you know what is in fact moral, yes, and then you dictate it to your society through the means of law and education. Well, that's how modern nation states function, isn't it? The modern nation states, although they give freedom of conscience, they give free. I mean, different city states, different nation states would have differences of understanding. But that's the basic quandary of modern nation states. They have to ask, what would be the degree of toleration? There will always be limits of what you can tolerate, because even within, say, liberal societies, they must set strict limits. For them, perhaps, in the case of I think Karl Popper, who wrote on enemies of the open society, or open society and its enemies, mentions that the limits of tolerance in liberal society would be towards those who would oppose that freedom. So that there they set their limit like that. So in other words, what I'm saying is that um, there is this struggle. There is this struggle between the state as a in our modern times. The state becomes the Leviathan, as what Thomas Hobbes proposed. The state is a Leviathan because it possesses the monopoly of violence. But the discourse of liberalism that develops with it made it such that the state, since it is composed of individuals within the state, despite possessing the monopoly of violence, can be understood in several different manners, in several different valuations. And this is the task of modern political philosophy. The task of modern political philosophy is to be understood uh, in the tradition of expanding and explaining the source of ethics, the source of rights, and the source of morality, and so on, such that the advancement of a society, the advancement of a community is dependent on the degree of their understanding of this relationship between morality and the state, putting the state always at bay with the tradition of civic society. And this, of course, assuming I'm speaking like this within the logic of say modern philosophical discourse that rejects, say, theism or theology as the foundation of the society. If human beings are the sole determiners of what is right and wrong, then it becomes a struggle between the state and the individual, between the state and the society. So the two tendencies exist. So the liberal tradition, which includes the utilitarians, the likes of J.S. Mill and Jeremy Bentham, would want to argue for uh, the maximum degree of liberty possible for the individual. They will try to justify the rights of freedom of speech and so on. On the other hand, those who oppose uh, the giving out of the handing out of maximum freedom and liberty would be someone like Thomas Hobbes, who suggests that in reality the only right that you have against the state is right of although you enter into a social contract, that is only insofar as so long as you're given safety, there's not much else that you have, because you have ceded the power to the Leviathan, to the state. And several other positions exist. This, inshallah, we will have a particular unit discussing this, because I believe after we have done the historical survey, we will deal with the question of morality and the state. But it is within Athens that they start questioning and start asking about these things. The sophists did not want to set any particular rule. They were happy to play by convention, by challenging the rules of convention. Socrates is of the view, or Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle is of the view that somehow morality is not political. Morality is natural. Uh, this this is the origins of the two schools of justice in the West. Yes, it is within the Greek city-state that they distinguish between morality, or rather justice, as a product of convention, which is the school of political justice, and the other, justice as pervading of nature, the school of natural justice. And whichever the thinker happens to align himself or herself will reveal, even as we read modern political theory. Now, the next question: could you share anything on business ethics which they taught in universities? I mentioned in the preamble just now that ethics is concerned about the subject matter of ethics is the discussion of character and custom. But the term ethics per se, in modern discourse, modern parlance, you can distinguish to refer to three things. One, ethics as a system, and this refers to religious ethics, the science of al-akhlaq with regards to the study of ethics in Islam. You study prophetic ethics in the sense that it is about the formation of character based on the sunnah. The second one is the ethics of conduct specific to particular professions. You have business ethics, you have medical ethics, bioethics, and this is usually determined by committees. Certainly, the committees, those who are part and parcel of the committee, determining what would be acceptable as practice within their structure, they would themselves come from a tradition. And this is the third one, philosophical ethics. Philosophical ethics, or maybe what we can call meta ethics, is concerned about is the study of ethical statements. What constitute ethical statements and judgments? What is the meaning of right and wrong? How do you derive them? Does ethics have a cognitive foundation? Is ethics a matter of convention, and so on? This is philosophical ethics. This is the particular concern that we will deliberate throughout the coming weeks. But the second sense, as you are asking just now, about business ethics, which are taught in universities, this one deserves I mean, those who study philosophical ethics like us, we have a right to ask, where do they derive the ethics of the business people? Where do they derive the ethics of the medical people? And whether or not that ethics would be, what is the status of such ethics? Do they have the force of sanctions and law? Or do they merely appeal to your conscience? But if they merely appeal to your conscience, to what extent are you bound by them? So this is the question that the serious ethical student must ask. Supposing a person say, "No, that's not ethical journalism." Well, supposing the person who is practicing non-ethical journalism, who is involved in, say, unethical reporting, what law is this person really breaking? Well, to us, we say it depends on which ethical system you subscribe. And this we will have to deliberate further, with regards to the problem of ethical relativism, ethical skepticism. All these things are real problems. I mean, that you'll have to think about. And if you want to ask about business ethics, which are taught in universities, I would suggest that, well, if you want to be a philosophically sophisticated person, you should look at the source books, the textbooks, and see whether they are, perhaps they subscribe to a utilitarian ethics, or do they subscribe to a sort of deontological ethics? These are modern schools of ethics which influence the writings of these books. But if we are Muslim, then we'll have to see whether or not they are in agreement with the worldview of Islam. As Muslims, we know that religion for us ultimately is the foundation of ethics and morality. Okay, so that's the concept of happiness by Aristotle. Is it still practiced today? Oh, the Aristotelian virtue ethics has made a comeback, mainly through the agency of several philosophers. But I think the main name that is associated with the revival of virtue ethics is Alasdair MacIntyre. Alasdair MacIntyre began his philosophical career in the analytic tradition. Meaning to say the tradition of philosophy which is usually practiced in the English-speaking countries that devotes its method on analysis on concepts, on philosophical analysis of conceptual content. Gradually, he came towards a Marxist understanding, because he saw in Marxist ethics a critique, a more satisfactory critique of the realities of capitalism and injustice in our time. But gradually, he understood that there is a certain degree of bankruptcy in modern moral discourse. So that's where he wanted to return to the ancients, in particular Aristotle. So he tried to revive virtue ethics, because he's saying that the modern tendency of ethics to merely focus on deontological ethics, utilitarian ethics, which is basically a study of right and wrong based on concepts and words, this is not the true sphere of ethics. He's saying that the true sphere of ethics that can produce good men and good women would be virtue ethics. Ethics should be focused on developing character rather than focusing on determining right and wrong actions per se. So he wants to re-establish virtue ethics. Gradually, he has supplemented this move. From virtue ethics, he went to Thomas Aquinas, which is his later position. And in more recent times, he has published a more robust and a more rich, a richer description of the problems of ethics and modernity. We will deal with that, inshallah, in the later weeks. Number 5, my question would be, other than its fundamental difference, how philosophical ethics differ from Islamic ethics, which is based on Islamic primary sources? If possible, can you please explain to what extent does this kind of philosophy affects Muslims against the proper ethics as shown by Sayyidina Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam? So now, with regards to Islamic ethics, al-ilm al-akhlaq, one of the things that Professor Al-Parsalan has pointed out, that ethics, yes, al-ilm al-akhlaq, as it was developed, was, shall we say, extraneous to the Islamic tradition. Meaning to say, it was external to the Islamic tradition. If we see, for example, the book of Ibn Miskawayh, the Tahdhib al-Akhlaq, the refinement of character, that is, the scholars would be able to determine, to see that, this philosophical ethics is external to the Islamic notion of understanding of akhlaq. Why is that? Because the Islamic notion of character ethics is derived from fiqh, understanding of religion. And with regards to fiqh, ethics, law, and politics, they are all governed by the Sharia. Ethics, law, and politics are governed by the Sharia of different shades, certainly. Yet, philosophical ethics, insofar as they exhort certain values, insofar as they exhort certain ethical character and proclivities, once they have been Islamized, can be used to deepen our understanding of our own religious sources. What is meant by that? First, the Prophet ﷺ, if we look at the genre of writings about him, which includes the Shama'il, that talks about his perfection, which covers both ethical perfection as well as physical, external manifestation of the perfection. The Prophet ﷺ, as we see, is not only a person who is following law. He wasn't just following the religious injunctions, but he was also of an ethically perfect individual, as found in the Quran and as revealed in his character. We know that the Prophet Muhammad was generous. We know that the Prophet Muhammad was forgiving, and so on. And these are aspects of perfect character. So what the later scholars, such as Imam Al-Ghazali, noticing that if we Islamize these conceptual terms, provided we judge these ideas, these ethical concepts, based on the worldview of Islam, meaning to say based on the original sources, they can be absorbed within the conceptual ambit of Islam, which is even richer than that. So that's why Imam Al-Ghazali, in writing the 20th book of the Ihya, yes, the book of Akhlaq an-Nubuwah, yes, Adabul Ma'ishah wal Akhlaq an-Nubuwah, there you will see that the shaja'ah of the Prophet Muhammad, yes, the courage of the Prophet Muhammad is mentioned. The iffah, the temperance of the Prophet Muhammad is mentioned. So basically, that there are commensurable and non-commensurable aspects, meaning to say there are certain ethical properties which are universal. There are certain ethical properties which are universal to the extent that the Greeks consider it as praiseworthy and the Muslims consider it as praiseworthy. So in this case, except that the difference would be the foundations of that ethical virtue. In our case, is the metaphysical worldview. In them, in their own metaphysics. But if they praise the virtue of generosity, and that generosity is also something we praise. However, there will be certain things that would be removed and challenged, what is the degree that is considered praiseworthy, and so on and so forth. So the process of this Islamization rests on the fact that the scholars who wanted to perform this, the like of Imam Al-Ghazali, would be somebody who understood the internal tradition extremely well, such that he can augment and develop the ideas while maintaining it, but now the virtues possess elements which is not found in the earlier ethical treatises of the Greeks. Iman, ma'rifah, which is foundational for the higher virtues, the higher religious spiritual virtues such as tawbah, sabar wa shukur, and the higher virtues. And furthermore, as Toshihiko Izutsu has revealed in his study of the ethical concepts in the Quran, there is an internal coherent structure of ethics in the Quran that can be derived from the analysis of the key terms, which is certainly understood by our scholars, and then they gradually develop it as a science of akhlaq. So ethics underwent the process of Islamization, and it became incorporated in the works of tasawwuf, in their delineation of the virtues. But the main, the acceptability, the praiseworthiness of a virtue, and of a virtue is now judged based on the criteria of the Quran and the Sunnah, and not some external criteria. So the problem, however, is that whereas the Muslims were successful in the case of Al-Ghazali to Islamize the ethics of Aristotle, in modern times, this process needs to be done again, because now that with the development and the rise of the modern West, we need to rethink fundamental concepts which are celebrated in the West: freedom, fraternity, rights, all these things that pertain to our values and culture and ethics, which are celebrated in the West. Courage and all these concepts that are understood has to be properly Islamized. If they were successful in the past, a series of dedicated thinkers in our time must perform this process of Islamization of the present set of values. Now, let's give an example. The notion of success, yes, the notion of success. In Islamic terms, it is something very clear that success, or falah, or al-fawz, or najah, all these concepts, yes, that pertains to some sort of desirable state, is inseparable from the notion of success in the akhirah. It is inseparable from salvation and safety with regards to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In modern times, how it has affects the Muslims is that because, since the West is secularized and their notion of success merely pertains to this world, how they affect the Muslims is to the extent that it affects all sorts of relations. A person may consider material and social success as the determiner of true success, to such an extent that it will influence family relations. Your marriage prospects, everything in your life. If your value structure, if your ethical structure is based on the modern Western structure, it would be something that might be detrimental to your faith. And you only need to look at the writings of Imam Haddad and Imam Al-Ghazali to suggest how we have departed from the original and true teachings of the Prophet. What is our criteria when we choose a subject that we want to specialize in? What is the criteria that we set to ourselves when we want to choose a subject or a career that we want to pursue in? In Imam Ghazali's time, it was arranged based on the Fardu Ain and the Fardu Kifayah distinction. In modern times, it is arranged based on success and arranged on employability. marriage choices also is based on the modern notion of success and so on. So these things require Islamization, and inshallah we will also have this discussion at a deeper level in the coming weeks. Is being politically active a fardu kifaya for liberal democracies with Muslim minorities? Does being Muslim provide us with some strategic ground against elements of society that are against Islam? Well, again, this notion of being politically active is something that must be understood properly. Amongst the Greeks, the term political is not distinguished from the term social. Because of the small size of the nation state, a person who is politically active would mean also that he is a person who is a socially responsible citizen. Meaning to say, the people that he meets at the assembly are his fellow countrymen. So when they vote for legislation, they are also at the same time concerned about their immediate family and their immediate friends and so on because of the small size. Now, in the case of the modern, as you say, liberal democracies, being politically active, yeah, I suppose, can be argued to be a fardu kifayah insofar as you want to defend the rights of the Muslims. And you wish to defend the rights of the Muslims to be able to live within those democracies in peace, or to be able to live within those democracies and practicing their religion. So a politically active life would, you can argue logically, promote that sense of well-being for the Muslims. So the entrance into political society, or the entrance into the political life, its purpose is to ensure well-being of the Muslims within say the liberal democracies. But we have to have some degree of creativity. I mean, we should not limit ourselves to political meaning political participation may not be limited to, say, joining the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. We look at how in the past times, I like to cite the case of the Ba'alawi family. When they joined a society in Hadramaut, yes, Al-Faqih Al-Muqaddam, the foremost jurist, the foremost in discernment, his ijtihad at that time in a tribal society where tribes defend themselves with their own with weapons attached to their body, feuds and revenge and things of that sort. Yes, a culture of protectionism and so on. Al-Faqih Al-Muqaddam's act of political participation was the breaking of his sword, and to determine that would be the vocation of his children and their descendants. What is meant by that? He refused political participation for the sake of gaining power in order that he can focus on the task of developing society, focus on the task of because now it would be to his interest, to his family's interest, to ensure public good. So he focused on education, and he focused on the changing of the ethical conditions of the people, and it therefore reflected a change that would gradually meet the requirements of political participation within Hadramaut and its nearby cities. And this model became developed, and it became spread, and it became part and parcel of the Islamization model of the Malay archipelago, whereby the Habaib, as they came to this part of the world, they use reason and arguments and the beauty of their character and the development of the intellectual tradition, the intellectual, ethical, moral development of the people, so as to make society livable for the Muslims, and so as to make society particularly suitable for the sake of the development of Islam. So what I'm saying is that in the case of the Muslims, depending on where they are and to what extent is the degree of Islamophobia rife in those particular states, they should invest not only in a political career, because being invested in a political career and in developing a political voice may to a certain extent ensure their status as minorities, but they would also do very well to develop themselves in terms of education, to develop themselves in terms of discourse, to develop themselves in the worldview, and to develop themselves as an agent that spreads good within the society. In other words, if they they become and they occupy the upper echelons of society, they become also the influencers in terms of the dominant mentality. If they become influencers of the dominant mentality, this may not necessarily means that they want to conquer the city. This may not necessarily mean that they would use that in order to oppress others, but that increase in influence, that increase and that winning, shall we say, in the game of in the public opinion will ensure their position within that society. Just look at how the Prophet Muhammad built the city of Medina and Mecca, how he strategized in the development of the discourse, because they fought for justice, they fought for the right virtues and values. I say this in a very general manner. So, meaning to say that it would be wise for Muslims to develop their sense of identity also, because on top of being, as you say, politically active. The danger is if you do not focus on, say, the development of worldview and the development of strong, resilient personalities and character, comfortable in their identity. The danger is that while you want to enter into politics in order to fulfill your fardu kifayah, you may end up being diluted, and you may end up suffering many regressive effects. Is there any more question? Yes. Well, if there are no more, we have already answered 6 questions. It's already 6:30. Inshallah, I look forward to more engaging sessions such as this one, and I thank you very much for your attendance. And feel free, of course, to ask questions between today and next week. Yes.
Sorry.
Oh, is that yes?
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, Dr. Mahidin. Thank you very much for that very wonderful talk. I've been waiting for, I think, for a long time. I've been teaching, say, bioethics for many years, and of course, it is Western ethics, as you very well know. So, of course, you're right that all the principles of ethics, like autonomy, beneficence, justice, all those are according to Western worldview, Western perception, Western perspective, and I kind of, in this, I'm in my retirement time. I'm now retired, so I'm thinking that I've done a great wrong by, leading my students to believe that those are the primary ethical principles that we ought to follow. But one thing I sort of, contend in myself. I pacify myself by saying that it offers students some logical way of thinking. For example, human rights ethics gives you some logic as to how to solve problems, especially problems in biomedical research and things like that. But other than that, I also would like to tell you that I was a bit disheartened by the Muslim world, who was also taking on Western ethics lock, stock and barrel. For example, I wanted to do my sabbatical in University Al-Azhar, and then I sort of connected with Jamal Seru. You know Jamal Seru?
I don't know.
Okay, all right. So he was also, crusading the Western ethics, autonomy. So I was quite surprised that in Al-Azhar itself, people are actually promoting Western ethics such as that. Until now, after more than 10 years of dabbling with ethics, now that I've met you, I think there's a lot to discuss here. And thank you for paving the way for this sort of critical discussion of Western ethics. But it is too late for me to now to go back and tell my students that. But of course, yes, I did also introduce, because I was feeling guilty teaching Western ethics. I also wanted students to bring in their own belief system, because in Malaysia we have Muslims, we have Hindus, we have Buddhists, we have Christians. So I also invite them to sort of talk about their own traditional, their own religious perspectives, sort of, to moderate the way I teach ethics. So, but I'm happy that I'm here. Sorry, I came in late because I had a problem, trying to log in. So thank you very much, Dr. Mayudin, for that. I think we can, I hope there's going to be a series of these talks, not just this one on the science of ethics. All right, thanks.
Alhamdulillah. I thank you very much for that very illuminating comment. You're right. I mean, the idea is that I'm very thankful that I can speak like this now. But this was truly by the hidayah of Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala, or the tawfiq of Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala, and the asbab of my teachers at CASIS. Um, the first step is to be able to question and whether or not, I mean, that's what Professor Naqib Alatas has been able to introduce. The idea is, knowledge is not neutral. Knowledge is, shall we say, knowledge is infused with the worldview of the dominant culture that is involved in spreading and developing it. So in our time, perhaps the toughest thing to overcome um, is the idea that these things are not objectively neutral, that they are dependent on the worldview that has been responsible for the developing of ethics and so on. It's just that of course the breaking away from that habit will take time, but I think that despite whatever regrets or remorse that you might have over the things that you cannot change in the past, the fact that Allah has given you this opportunity to recognize some of these things is already good enough. I mean, and I am a firm believer in what Professor Wan used to say, that um, we do not delineate, nor do we distinguish, or we do not reject or accept the delineation of formal, informal, and non-formal types of learning. So if a person may be restricted now in the formal channels of teaching, you may still share the fruits of your labor through whatever channels that Allah has granted you. And even if you may not have the same opportunity with the same groups of students or or later batches, or to that degree, there will still be, inshallah, time and opportunities that Allah will grant you to correct some of these things. If not correct some of these things in a manner of teaching, then through advice of your colleagues, through advice of people who are just teaching the bioethics and so on. um, and that's the essence also of academic freedom, isn't it? That you should be able to judge whether or not what you're teaching is in fact conforming to the standards of truth. If it's not, then your academic freedom, which is your right in this case, is to question and is to challenge the content of what you're teaching. With that, I think, Alhamdulillah, I'm very happy with what we have today. Yes, thank you. Inshallah, we do have some other series planned, but already the series on ethics will have several more weeks, inshallah. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.